The Galactic Museum of Extinct Species stood as a monument to failure. Within its crystalline halls, the assembled races of the Confederation displayed their greatest shame species they had failed to save. The Valorians had their exhibit of the glass-winged Shimmerfla. The Kelthans mourned their oceanic Levia. But the crown jewel, the centerpiece that drew visitors from across 7 systems, was the dragon egg of Pyros Prime. Nia pressed her small hands against the containment field, her breath fogging the energy barrier. At 7 years old, she was the youngest human to ever visit the museum, brought by her father, Robert, and xenobiological researcher stationed on the museum's orbital platform. "It's so beautiful," she whispered, her dark eyes reflecting the egg's obsidian surface. The artifact was massive, nearly 3 meters tall, its shell marked with veins of what appeared to be frozen amber and gold patterns that seemed to shift in the low light. Robert smiled, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. The Pyrosi were incredible creatures. The last of their kind died out 400 years ago, long before humans even reached the stars. Why did they die? Naya asked, her voice carrying that particular sadness children feel when confronting loss they don't fully understand. War, Robert said simply. The Pyrosi homeworld was caught between 2 expanding empires. The dragons tried to remain neutral, but neutrality isn't always an option. By the time the Confederation intervened, only eggs remained. And eggs, without their parents' plasma breath to incubate them. He trailed off, gesturing at the cold, dormant shell before them. The museum's curator, a Valorian named Shekstar, approached on his 6 legs, his compound eyes glittering with ancient grief. 63 eggs we recovered, he said, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into standard. All of them cold, all of them dead. We've preserved them as a reminder of our failure. Nia's lower lip trembled. That's so sad. They died alone, waiting for their mummies and daddies. Something in Shekstar's posture softened. You humans have such emotional responses to extinct species. Most races eventually accept death as entropy, but you always seem to mourn as if the loss was personal. Robert nodded. We know extinction too well. Earth has a long history of losing species to our own carelessness. Maybe that's why we feel it so deeply. As they spoke, Naya had moved closer to the containment field, studying the egg with an intensity unusual for a child her age. Mr. Shekstar, can I ask you something? Of course, young one. If the eggs needed heat to hatch, why didn't anyone try to warm them? The curator's antennae drooped. We tried everything. Plasma generators, stellar radiation, even samples of Pyrosi biomatter to simulate parental presence. Nothing worked. The eggs require something specific, resonance, frequency, and the plasma breath that we could never replicate. The dragonfire wasn't just heat. It was life itself. Somehow, Nia looked up at her father. Dad, remember what Grandma used to say? That humans have fire in their hearts. Robert chuckled. That's just a saying, sweetheart. A metaphor. But humans are warm, Nia insisted. Warmer than most species, right? You told me that. You said we're like little furnaces because of our metabolism. Shekstar's translator caught the words, and his posture straightened with sudden attention. The child makes an interesting point. Human core temperature is indeed unusually high, 37 degrees Celsius, and your species does produce a remarkable amount of biothermal energy. Surely you don't think, Robert began. 400 years, Shekstar interrupted, his voice carrying a tremor that his species rarely displayed. 400 years, and we never considered. Humans are the newest Confederation species. You've only been here 30 years. He turned to his console, manipulating holographic displays. The biosignature, the thermal output, it's close. Remarkably close. You can't be serious, Robert said. But his scientific curiosity was already overtaking his skepticism. The containment field can be adjusted, Shekstar said, working frantically. If the young one wishes to try ... Naya was already nodding, bouncing on her toes. Please, Dad. Please let me try. Every instinct Robert had as a father screamed caution. But as a scientist, as someone who had spent his career studying the impossible bonds between life and death, he found himself nodding. If there's even a chance. Shekstar lowered the containment field. The temperature dropped immediately. The egg had been kept in a near vacuum to preserve it, but now it sat exposed, its surface gleaming under the museum lights. Naya approached slowly, reverently. She reached out and pressed her small hands against the shell. It was cold, colder than ice, and she gasped. Naya, if it's too cold, Robert started. No, she said firmly. No, it needs this. It needs to know someone cares. She pressed closer, wrapping her arms as far around the massive egg as they would reach, pressing her cheek against its surface. She closed her eyes and thought of warmth, of love, of all the stories her grandmother told her about dragons and magic and the fire that burns in every heart that refuses to give up. For a long moment, nothing happened. Robert was about to pull his daughter away when Shextar's gasp stopped him. The veins of amber in the eggs showed they were glowing, faintly at first, then brighter. The golden patterns began to pulse with light. The temperature sensors around the exhibit screamed warnings as the egg's surface temperature began to rise, not from external heat, but from within. Naya didn't let go. She held tighter, tears streaming down her face. "Come on," she whispered. "You can do it. You're not alone." The egg cracked. A single fracture, hair-thin, appeared along the largest amber vein. Then another. The shell shuddered, and a sound emerged, a chirping, clicking sound that the translator couldn't process because it had never heard a living pyrosi before. Robert watched, frozen in wonder, as the egg continued to crack. Shextar was already calling for emergency biosupport teams, his voice shaking with something between terror and transcendent joy. "Impossible," the curator kept repeating. "Impossible, impossible, impossible." But Nia just smiled, still holding the egg, still sharing her warmth. Because humans knew, something that the ancient races had forgotten in their advanced science and logical calculations, that sometimes, the impossible just needed someone who cared enough to try. The egg shattered fully, and a small obsidian-scaled head emerged, eyes like molten gold blinking in the light. It looked at Naya and chirped again, a sound of recognition and trust. Behind them, alarms were ringing throughout the museum. Scientists from a dozen species were rushing to the hall, but in that moment, there was only a human child and a dragon hatchling, meeting for the first time in 400 years, and in the cold halls of the Museum of Extinct Species. One exhibit would need to be relocated. Because extinction, as humans had just proven once again, was never as permanent as the galaxy believed.